The unexpected challenger. The evening was warm in Los Angeles. The kind of evening when the air feels heavy with stories waiting to happen. In a quiet street not far from downtown, a small karate dojo stood. The dojo was not famous, but it had a reputation for one thing: young fighters full of pride and energy. It was the kind of place where new champions dreamed of being discovered, and where men and women trained hard to test their limits. Inside that dojo, the sound of fists striking pads echoed. Students were sweating, moving in rhythm, their eyes sharp with determination. In the center of the room stood a young man named Ryu. He was 25, tall, strong, with the sharp confidence of someone who had never lost. To the others, he was already a champion. He had won local tournaments, broken wooden boards with his bare hands, and carried himself like a warrior born for greatness. His eyes burned with ambition, and his spirit demanded challenges. But ambition has a strange way of guiding people toward paths they do not fully understand. That night, a visitor quietly entered the dojo. His steps were soft, almost unnoticed at first. He wore simple clothes, black jeans, a plain shirt, and a calm expression. His hair was slightly messy, his posture relaxed, and his presence seemed almost ordinary. The students did not pay much attention until someone whispered, "That looks like Keanu Reeves." The whisper spread quickly. Students turned their heads, their eyes widening. It was indeed Keanu Reeves, the actor known across the world. Many saw him only as a Hollywood star, famous for his roles in action films. What they did not know was that behind the cameras, Keanu had spent years training in real martial arts. For movie roles, he had worked with masters in judo, karate, jiu-jitsu, and kung fu. His training was not just for the screen. It had shaped his discipline, his humility, and his deep respect for the art of fighting. But to the young men in the dojo, he was still just an actor. Ryu's eyes locked on him, and pride quickly rose. He stepped forward, his voice carrying across the room. "You are Keanu Reeves," he said with a half-smile. "You play a fighter in movies. But here, this is not Hollywood. This is real." The students laughed softly, not out of cruelty but out of excitement. They could feel tension building, like a storm about to break. Ryu raised his chin. "I challenge you," he said firmly. "Show us if the legend of the screen is anything in reality." The dojo grew silent. Some students thought Ryu was being disrespectful, others thought it was bold. But all of them were curious. They wanted to see if the man they had seen in films could stand in real combat. Keanu looked at Ryu, and for a moment his face showed no reaction. Then he smiled gently. It was not the smile of arrogance, but of kindness mixed with humility. "I came here to watch," Keanu said in a calm voice. "But if you wish for me to join, I will not refuse. Only remember, fighting is not about pride. It is about respect." Those words, simple and soft, carried more weight than the sharpest punch. Some students felt it deeply, but Ryu only smirked. "Respect comes after victory," he answered. "Let us see who earns it tonight." The instructor of the dojo hesitated. He respected Keanu, but also understood Ryu's fire. He finally nodded, allowing the sparring match. Mats were prepared, and the students circled around, their eyes glowing with anticipation. Whispers filled the air, some betting on Ryu's youth and strength, others secretly hoping the actor would surprise them. As Keanu stepped onto the mat, his movements were slow but controlled. There was no tension in his body, no sign of nervousness. He bowed deeply to Ryu, showing respect in the traditional way. Ryu bowed quickly in return, but his bow lacked patience, filled with eagerness to fight. Their eyes met, and for a second the room held its breath. The match began. Ryu came forward fast, his fists striking like arrows, his body pushing with the energy of a man who wanted to prove something. His strikes were powerful, sharp, and loud against the air. Keanu, however, did not rush. He moved like water, flowing back, stepping aside, blocking lightly, and letting the attacks pass him. His calmness made the students whisper in shock. It was not what they expected. Keanu did not fight with anger, nor with fear. He fought with balance. Sweat dripped down Ryu's face as he tried harder. His kicks swung with speed. His punches landed closer. But each time, Keanu's defense was there. Smooth, almost invisible, as if he had been doing this his whole life. And then, with one small movement, Keanu shifted. His foot slid, his hand touched Ryu's arm, and in one breath, Ryu was on the ground. Not hurt, not broken, but controlled. Keanu had redirected his power, turning his strength into emptiness. The students gasped. Silence filled the dojo. Ryu's pride cracked for the first time. He stood up quickly, anger flashing in his eyes. "Again," he said. "That was luck." Keanu only nodded with patience. "As many times as you wish." The fight continued. Ryu came again and again, faster, harder, his pride driving him forward. Yet every time Keanu's calmness held steady. He never struck with violence. He only used Ryu's strength against him, guiding his falls, controlling his movements. It was like watching fire try to consume water, only to be swallowed instead. After several rounds, Ryu fell to his knees, his chest rising with heavy breaths. His hands trembled, his pride wounded. The dojo was silent, filled with respect now, not for victory, but for humility. Keanu stepped forward, his hand reaching out. "You are strong," he said softly, "but strength without respect will always be empty. Do not fight to defeat others. Fight to defeat the pride within yourself." Tears burned in Ryu's eyes, though he tried to hide them. In that moment, he realized something he had never understood. He had been chasing victory to feed his pride, not to honor the art. And it took a man he thought was only an actor to reveal that truth. The students clapped quietly, not for the winner, but for the lesson. The instructor bowed deeply to Keanu, thanking him not just for the fight, but for the wisdom he shared. Ryu lowered his head, humbled, and whispered, "Thank you." Keanu smiled again, the same gentle smile as before. "Remember," he said, "a true master does not seek to be seen. He seeks only to understand." As the night grew darker, the dojo carried a new kind of light, a light of humility, respect, and growth. No one there would forget what they had witnessed. For them, the evening had begun as a challenge, but it ended as a lesson that would stay in their hearts forever. Whispers of doubt and respect. The dojo remained quiet long after Keanu Reeves left that night. The air still carried the weight of what everyone had seen. The young students spoke in whispers, replaying the movements, the calm defense, and the surprising way Ryu had been humbled. The match had ended hours ago, yet the lesson was carved deep into every mind. But for Ryu, the silence after the fight was heavier than any punch he had ever taken. He sat alone on the edge of the mat, staring at his own hands. Those hands had broken boards, won trophies, and gained applause. Tonight, they had been powerless. His pride stung like an open wound. No matter how hard he tried, he could not forget how easily Keanu had moved around him, how every strike had been met with control, not force. It was as if he had been fighting against someone who knew his every thought before he acted. The instructor, an older man named Sensei Haruto, walked slowly toward him. His steps were steady, his voice calm. "You fought with strength, Ryu," he said. "But strength without patience is like a blade without a handle. You cut yourself before you cut the enemy." Ryu clenched his fists. "But Sensei, he is an actor. How can he fight like that? It does not make sense. Haruto knelt beside him, his eyes thoughtful. The world often hides truth behind appearances. You saw an actor, but what you missed was the years of training behind his silence. Real martial arts is not about show. It is about discipline. He carried that discipline with him. You carried only pride. The words struck deep, sharper than any blade. Ryu felt his throat tighten. For years he had trained to be stronger, faster, and louder in the ring, but tonight he had seen something different, strength that spoke without words, humility that commanded respect. The following days were restless. Ryu trained harder than ever, his strikes faster, his kicks sharper. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw Keanu's calm face. He remembered the way Keanu bowed before the fight, the way he smiled even in the heat of challenge. And worst of all, he remembered his own smirk, the arrogance that had blinded him. Rumors began to spread outside the dojo. People who had been there whispered about the night the karate champion was humbled by a Hollywood star. Some laughed, some doubted, and some respected Keanu even more. Ryu overheard two students at a cafe say, "Maybe movies are not fake after all. Maybe Keanu really is a martial artist." Those words stung, not because they doubted Ryu's skill, but because they were true. He had underestimated someone based on assumptions, and the world was reminding him of it. One evening, as Ryu practiced alone, Sensei Haruto entered the dojo carrying an old book. Its pages were worn, the cover faded with age. He placed it on the mat in front of Ryu. The crowd gasped. Tension thickened. Keanu bowed respectfully. "Martial arts is not entertainment, but if you wish for a demonstration, I will not refuse." The host tried to stop them, but the audience wanted to see. Cheers rose, cameras pointed, and suddenly the stadium became a battlefield. Ryu watched with wide eyes as Victor charged forward, his strikes sharp and brutal. The air cracked with the sound of his power. But just like before, Keanu flowed like water, calm and steady. He moved aside, blocked, redirected, and within seconds, Victor was struggling against his own force. The crowd roared. Every failed strike was proof that violence was powerless against discipline. Then, with one graceful move, Keanu swept Victor's leg and brought him down. He did not hurt him, he did not embarrass him. Instead, he helped him up, bowed, and said, "Thank you for allowing me to share this lesson." The crowd erupted in applause, not for the fight, but for the humility. Ryu felt his chest tighten. He knew in that moment that Keanu was not just a fighter. He was a master of humility, a mirror that showed people their own pride. And deep inside, Ryu whispered to himself, "I must learn this, no matter what it takes." The beginning of the quiet path after the festival, Ryu could not sleep for many nights. The roar of the crowd, the sight of Victor falling, and the calm way Keanu bowed after victory kept replaying in his mind. It was not the defeat that haunted him anymore. It was the lesson. The truth that power meant little without humility. One evening, after training late, Ryu sat alone in the dojo. The lights were dim, the air still smelled of sweat and wood polish, and his chest felt heavy with questions. He whispered to himself, "I want to learn, not to win, not to be praised. I want to learn the way he carries himself, the way he is both strong and gentle." The next day, Ryu made a choice. He went to the small guest house where Keanu was staying during his time in the city. His heart pounded as he stood at the door. When it opened, Keanu was there, dressed simply as always, holding a cup of tea, his eyes calm but welcoming. "Ryu," Keanu said softly, as if he had been expecting him. Ryu bowed deeply. "I want to learn from you. I know you are an actor, but you are also a master. I want to understand what you understand." Keanu smiled gently, but he shook his head. "I am not a master. I am still learning myself. But if you want to walk beside me, I can share what I have learned." Those words struck Ryu in a new way. Here was a man who had humbled him twice, yet he refused to call himself a master. The humility was deeper than any lesson from a book. They began meeting in the mornings at a quiet park. It was not a formal dojo, just open grass, tall trees, and the sound of birds at sunrise. Keanu arrived early, stretching slowly, moving with patience. Ryu, still filled with energy, tried to copy every motion, but his movements were rushed, sharp, and full of tension. Keanu watched him with quiet eyes. "Slow down," he said. "Do not fight the air as if it is your enemy. Feel it as your guide." At first, Ryu did not understand. He thought speed and strength were everything, but after days of practice, his body began to change. He noticed how his breath controlled his power, how his balance was steadier when his mind was calm. One morning, Keanu showed him a simple exercise. He placed a small cup of water on Ryu's open palm. "Move across the grass without spilling it," he instructed. Ryu scoffed. "This is too simple." "Then do it," Keanu replied. Ryu tried. Within 3 steps, the water spilled. He tried again, moving faster, stronger, but each time the water splashed onto the ground. His face turned red with frustration. Keanu simply said, "Strength without control is nothing. Try again tomorrow." Day after day, Ryu returned, and each time the cup spilled. But slowly, his movements grew softer, his steps lighter. Until one morning, after weeks of effort, he walked across the grass with not a single drop spilled. His chest filled with pride, but Keanu shook his head gently. "Do not be proud of the cup. Be proud of the patience it taught you." Ryu bowed his head, realizing the truth. As weeks passed, Keanu did not just teach him movements. He told him stories of the masters he had trained with for movie roles, of the discipline they demanded, of the nights he spent practicing until his body ached. "Films end when the cameras stop," Keanu said. "But training never ends. You do not train for others. You train to know yourself." These words echoed in Ryu's mind long after each session ended. But outside the park, life was not quiet. Ryu's old friends from the dojo began to notice his absence. Some laughed, saying he was wasting time with an actor. Others warned him that his reputation as a champion was fading. "You were once the strongest here," one friend said. "Now you bow to a Hollywood star. People are losing respect for you." Ryu's heart ached. Part of him wanted to fight back, to prove himself again in tournaments. But then he remembered the cup of water, the way it taught him patience. He stayed silent. Yet the whispers grew. Soon, even the dojo community began to divide. Some students admired Ryu's humility, while others mocked him. The tension grew heavier until one evening, Sensei Haruto called Ryu aside. "I see your path changing," the old man said. "This choice will bring both respect and challenge. If you continue, you must accept that some will not understand. But remember, true warriors walk with the strength of silence, not the noise of the crowd." Ryu nodded, though fear trembled in his chest. Then, fate brought another twist. A new tournament was announced, an international event where fighters from many countries would gather. It was not just about strength, it was about honor. Champions from different styles, karate, kung fu, judo, taekwondo, would face each other. And among the list of invited guests, there was one name that shocked Ryu: Victor, the same arrogant champion who had challenged Keanu at the festival. Rumors spread that Victor was still angry, not only at Keanu but also at anyone who followed him. "He thinks Keanu made a fool of him," people whispered. "He is training harder than ever, and he wants revenge." Ryu felt his chest tighten. He knew he would be in the same tournament, and if fate placed them against each other, Victor would not show mercy. That night, Ryu went to the park with heavy steps. Keanu was already there, practicing quietly under the fading light of sunset. "I have to fight in the international tournament," Ryu said, his voice filled with both fear and determination. Keanu looked at him calmly. "Then fight. But remember, the opponent is never the enemy. The enemy is the pride inside you. If you defeat that, no one can truly defeat you." Those words sank deep. But as Ryu trained for the tournament, the pressure grew. He knew the eyes of his dojo, his friends, even the city would be on him. And somewhere inside, a dangerous question began to whisper. Was he training for humility, or was pride returning once more? The tournament day approached, and the world seemed to hold its breath, the fire of the tournament. The day of the international tournament arrived like a storm. The stadium was massive, filled with flags from many countries, the sound of drums, and the roar of thousands of voices. Fighters from around the world gathered, some tall, some small, each carrying their own style, their own pride, their own story. Ryu stood among them, his heart racing. His white uniform felt heavier than usual, as if the cloth itself carried all his fears and hopes. He bowed silently when his name was called, but his eyes searched the crowd for one face. Keanu was there, sitting quietly among the audience, not in the spotlight but in the shadows, watching with calm eyes. Their gazes met for a moment, and Ryu felt strength flow into him like water filling an empty cup. The tournament began. The first fight was against a Taekwondo champion from Korea. His kicks were sharp and fast, slicing the air with power. Ryu struggled at first, blocking clumsily, his balance tested. The crowd shouted, each strike sounding like thunder. But then he remembered Keanu's words. "Do not fight the air as if it is your enemy. Feel it as your guide." Ryu slowed down, breathing deeper. Instead of chasing the speed, he waited. When the kick came again, he stepped aside, redirecting it with his arm. The opponent stumbled slightly, and Ryu countered with a clean strike to the chest. The referee raised his hand. Victory. The crowd roared, but Ryu did not smile. He bowed deeply to his opponent, showing respect. The fighter bowed back, and in that moment, Ryu knew he was changing. Round after round, Ryu advanced. He faced judo throws, kung fu sweeps, and karate punches sharper than knives. Each time he struggled, each time he bled, but each time he remembered the cup of water, the lesson of patience, and the humility Keanu had shown him. Slowly, he earned victories not just with strength, but with calmness. The crowd began to notice. Whispers spread. "This is not the same Ryu as before. He fights differently, slower, calmer, but stronger." But fate was cruel. As the tournament neared the final stages, the announcement came. Next match, Ryu versus Victor. The stadium erupted with cheers and gasps. The same Victor who had challenged Keanu, the same Victor whose pride had been wounded before, now stood across the mat. His eyes burned with fire, his muscles tense like coiled steel. He bowed quickly, but his smirk showed no respect. "You follow that actor now?" Victor sneered. "You are weaker than I thought." Ryu's heart pounded. The old Ryu would have answered with anger, but the new Ryu took a breath, bowed deeply, and said, "Let us fight." The match began. Victor exploded forward with brutal punches, each one heavier than the last. Ryu blocked, dodged, but the power rattled his bones. The crowd roared with every strike. Ryu felt himself falling back, his body aching. "You cannot win," Victor shouted between strikes. "Pride is the only strength that matters." The words cut deep. Doubt rose inside Ryu. Was he truly stronger now? Or was he weaker for following humility? His mind screamed with questions. The punches grew heavier, his body staggered, and the crowd began to chant Victor's name. Then, through the noise, he heard Keanu's voice in his memory. The opponent is never the enemy. The enemy is the pride inside you. If you defeat that, no one can truly defeat you. Ryu closed his eyes for a breath, letting the words sink into his bones. When he opened them again, something had changed. His movements grew calmer, his fear quieter. Victor struck again, but this time Ryu stepped aside with grace, redirecting the force. The punch missed. The lesson of defeat. The stadium was silent as Ryu stood across from Master Liang. The old man's posture was calm, his breathing steady, his eyes carrying the depth of oceans. Ryu's muscles ached, his arms were heavy, and his legs trembled. He had already fought through so many battles, and now he was standing before someone who looked fragile but carried the weight of centuries in his presence. The referee gave the signal. The match began. Ryu moved first, his fists sharp, his stance strong. He wanted to test the old man's defense, but in a blur, Master Liang shifted, redirecting the strike with a single hand. Ryu stumbled forward, nearly falling. The crowd gasped. Ryu tried again, this time with a powerful kick, but Liang stepped aside gracefully, using only a gentle push to send Ryu spinning off balance. There was no force, no violence, only control. The more Ryu attacked, the more he failed. Every strike ended with him on the ground or trapped in a hold. Sweat poured down his face, his lungs burned, and frustration clawed at his chest. Yet each time he fell, Master Liang bowed and waited for him to rise again. There was no arrogance, no mockery, only respect. After the fourth fall, Ryu lay on the mat, gasping for air. Whispers filled the stadium. Some thought the fight was over. Others believed he would give up. But in the middle of the noise, Ryu remembered Keanu's words. The opponent is never the enemy. The enemy is the pride inside you. Slowly, painfully, Ryu stood up again. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes were different now. He no longer looked at Liang as someone to defeat. He looked at him as someone to learn from. This time, Ryu did not rush. He slowed down, moving carefully, focusing on his breath. He let go of the need to win. And when Liang struck, Ryu did not resist. Instead, he flowed with the movement, letting his body turn with the strike. The crowd gasped again, but this time in wonder. Ryu was learning in the middle of the fight. Liang's eyes softened, as if he recognized the shift. He tested Ryu with more techniques, and Ryu stumbled, but adapted. He did not master it instantly, but his spirit was growing stronger. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, Liang made one last move, sweeping Ryu off his feet and pinning him gently on the mat. The referee stepped forward, declaring Liang the winner. The stadium erupted in cheers. Ryu lay on the ground, his body aching, his pride broken, but his heart at peace. He had lost, yet for the first time, it did not feel like failure. It felt like truth. Master Liang helped him up. He looked into Ryu's eyes and spoke softly so only he could hear. You are strong, but strength is not your gift. Humility is. Hold on to it, and you will go further than victory could ever take you. Tears stung Ryu's eyes. He bowed deeply, his forehead touching the mat. The crowd followed, bowing in respect for the wisdom of the old master and the courage of the young fighter who had given everything. After the ceremony, Ryu searched the crowd until he found Keanu. He walked toward him, his legs heavy, his spirit raw. When he stood before him, he bowed again. I lost, he whispered. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. No, he said gently. You learned, and that is greater than winning. Those words broke the last wall inside Ryu. He could not hold back his tears. In front of the crowd, in front of his rivals, he cried, not from weakness, but from the weight of transformation. Keanu embraced him briefly, a gesture full of quiet kindness. Today you faced a master, he continued. But remember, The path does not end here. The path is only beginning. The tournament ended, but the story did not. In the days that followed, newspapers and social media exploded with the story. Some headlines read, "Young champion humbled by wisdom." Others said, "Keanu Reeves guides fighter toward respect." The world admired Ryu not for winning, but for the way he carried his defeat. Yet behind the applause, another truth began to emerge. Whispers spread through the martial arts community about Keanu. Some masters revealed that he had trained with them in silence, years before his films made him famous. They said he did not just train for movies, he trained because he loved the art itself. Ryu was shocked when he learned this. He confronted Keanu one morning in the park. "You trained with masters? You knew all along that you were more than just an actor." Keanu smiled softly. "Labels do not matter. Actor, fighter, student, teacher, we are all the same when we step onto the mat. I did not want fame to become a wall between me and learning, so I trained quietly, without needing the world to know." Ryu's heart ached with respect. "Why did you not tell anyone?" Keanu looked toward the sunrise, his voice calm. "Because real strength does not need to be told. It only needs to be lived." Those words settled deep into Ryu's soul. But life does not let peace last forever. Weeks later, Victor returned, not as a rival in the ring, but as a shadow in Ryu's path. His pride, though cracked, was not destroyed. He sought Ryu at the dojo one evening, his eyes darker than before. "You think you are wise now?" Victor spat. "You think losing makes you stronger? I will show you the truth. Next month, there is an underground match. No referees, no rules. Meet me there, or admit you are a coward." Ryu's heart pounded. He knew these fights were dangerous. They were not about respect. They were about ego, money, and violence. But Victor's challenge burned like fire in his chest. He told Keanu about it. Keanu listened quietly, then asked, "What does your heart say?" Ryu struggled. "My heart says it is wrong, but my pride says I cannot refuse." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then this is your greatest test. Not against Victor, not against the underground fight, but against the pride inside you. Can you walk away, or will you let pride pull you into darkness?" The question haunted Ryu. Days turned into nights, and the pressure grew. The dojo whispered, the community waited, and Ryu's own mind fought itself. The night of the underground match drew closer, and Ryu knew he had to make a choice, one that would define not just his path as a fighter, but his path as a human being. The choice of the heart, the night of the underground fight, arrived like a dark cloud. Whispers spread across the city. People said Victor was ready, training harder than ever, his anger burning brighter than fire. Others said Ryu would go because no champion could walk away from such a challenge. But Ryu sat alone in the dojo, staring at the mat. His fists were clenched, his breath heavy. He remembered Victor's words, the taunts, the threats. But above all, he remembered Keanu's question. Can you walk away, or will you let pride pull you into darkness? The dojo was silent except for the sound of his heart. Suddenly, the door opened. Keanu stepped in, his presence calm, his face gentle. You have not gone, Keanu said softly. Ryu looked down. I want to. I want to prove myself. But my heart feels heavy. I know it is wrong. I do not want to fight for pride anymore. But if I refuse, everyone will call me weak. Keanu sat beside him on the mat. The world will always speak, but their voices are nothing compared to the voice of your own soul. True strength is not in fighting when you should not. True strength is in walking away when your pride demands you to stay. Tears filled Ryu's eyes. But what if Victor never stops? What if he keeps chasing me? Keanu looked at him deeply. Then you must show him a strength he cannot defeat. Not fists, not kicks, but humility. Pride feeds on pride. Humility starves it. The words pierced through Ryu's chest. He realized then that this was his real fight. Not against Victor, not against the crowd, but against himself. So when the night came, Ryu walked to the place of the underground fight, not to enter, but to stand at the door. Inside, he could hear the roar of the crowd, the smell of sweat and smoke filling the air. Victor stood in the ring, waiting, his body shaking with rage. "Where is he?" Victor shouted. "Where is the so-called champion?" Whispers spread. People laughed. Others shouted Ryu's name, demanding him to fight. And then, the door opened. Ryu stepped inside, not in fighting clothes, but in his plain training uniform. He walked calmly to the edge of the ring. Victor's eyes lit with fire. "Finally," Victor growled. "Step in and I will break you." But Ryu shook his head. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled. "I will not fight you." The crowd erupted in chaos. Some booed, some shouted insults, some laughed. Victor's face twisted with fury. "Coward!" he screamed. "You fear me!" Ryu looked at him calmly. "No, I fear nothing. But I respect the art too much to fight without honor. You can call me weak, you can call me coward, you can say anything you want, but I will not fight for pride, not anymore." The words cut through the chaos like lightning. The crowd went silent for a moment, shocked. Victor's fists shook. He stepped forward, ready to strike. But Ryu did not move. He stood tall, his eyes steady, his body calm. The silence grew heavier. Victor raised his hand, but then stopped. Something in Ryu's stillness, something in his refusal to bend, broke through his rage. He dropped his hand slowly, his breath heavy, his eyes full of confusion. The crowd did not cheer. They did not boo. They only watched, as if witnessing something they had never seen before. And then, from the shadows, Keanu stepped forward. He bowed deeply to Ryu, his voice calm but strong. "This," he said to the crowd, "is the real fight. Not fists, not anger. This is victory over pride. And it is the hardest victory of all." The room was silent. Slowly, one person began to clap, then another, and another. Soon the underground arena was filled not with shouts of violence, but with the sound of respect. Victor stood frozen, his pride cracked beyond repair. He looked at Ryu, then at Keanu, and for the first time his eyes softened. He did not bow, but he turned and walked away, his silence louder than his anger. Ryu stood still, his chest heavy, his heart light. He had chosen. He had won, not over Victor, but over himself. Afterward, outside under the night sky, Ryu turned to Keanu. "Thank you," he whispered. "Without you, I would have lost myself." Keanu shook his head. "You chose the path. I only held a light. Remember, Ryu, the journey never ends. Every day, pride will try to return. Every day, you must defeat it again." Ryu nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "Then I will keep walking, not as a champion, not as a hero, but as a student." Keanu smiled, the same gentle smile he had carried since the first day. "And that," he said softly, "is the true mark of a master." The night was quiet, but inside Ryu's heart, there was a peace deeper than victory, deeper than applause. It was the peace of humility, the strength of kindness, and the quiet truth that respect is greater than pride. The story of the young karate champion who challenged an actor had become something greater. It was no longer about a fight, or even about fame. It was about the power of humility to change a man's soul. And from that day forward, Ryu carried that lesson everywhere he went. When he trained, when he taught, when he lived. He remembered the cup of water, the bow of respect, and the silent wisdom of Keanu Reeves.